the thing about time is, once it's gone, it's gone. So, sleep is great, but how much sleep do you need? So if I go to bed at, 10 o'clock at night, I can get up at 5 a.m. and while other people are sleeping, I'm beginning to build into myself. So that's where I do the things that are going to propel my future.
Welcome to Young and Adulting, a podcast of the Young Adults community at Christ Fellowship Church. Our hope is to create a safe place for authentic conversation around the ins and outs of life as we all try to navigate following Jesus in the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the conversation.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Young and Adulting podcast. We're here in this series called How To, where we are helping you know how to live an abundant life, over the top, the life you've always wanted to live. And I'm joined today by a pastor, a leader, a mentor, a friend. It's Pastor James Duvall. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Oh man, it's my pleasure, and I've been looking forward to hanging out and talking how to today. So, yeah.
We're talking about how to manage our time, but this is not your first time hanging out with us on the podcast. The last time that you were with us, we talked about, I think the year was 2020.
Yeah.
You read how many books?
77.
77 books. 2021, how many did you read?
Oh, it was around 70 or something like that. Yeah.
70. And are
this
we
year,
on pace?
This year I'm a little bit lower. I'm about 44 so far this year. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, catch us up on your life, where you are in leadership, some of the new ventures, a lot of podcasts. So catch us up on where you are, Pastor.
Man, life is good, and enjoying just family, enjoying ministry. I think last time I was on the podcast, we were doing a podcast called the Live Lead Last podcast. My wife and I
That's
were.
right.
We've kind of pivoted from that, and for the last year or so, we've been doing a new podcast called The Art of Spousing. And it's all about how to take your marriage from mundane to masterpiece level. So we've really loved doing that. It's a little bit different format than our last podcast, where Live Lead Last was all interview based. This is a little bit of both. So my wife Lisa and I, we do some content twice a month, and then now 2 times a month we're doing some interviews with other couples. Specifically around the dynamics of the Enneagram in marriage. And
that's great.
We really believe that the more aware you are of yourself, the better that you can be aware as a couple and have health and strength in your marriage. So doing that, I'm also hosting a new podcast for the church called the Nexus Podcast, which is all about leadership, ministry leadership, and we're interviewing some great leaders inside the church and outside the church, friends of the house. And so that's been a lot of fun. And we're finishing up season 2 of that and looking forward to what season 3 has to offer.
That's incredible. So you traded out one podcast for two podcasts.
Yeah.
It's quite the trade.
Yeah, I love this medium. I mean, I love what you guys are doing with Young and Adulting. It's a great way to get pieces of content and bite-sized pieces for people to have, and they can listen to in their car or while they're exercising and so forth. But getting a lot of different thinkers, a lot of different voices, a lot of different concepts, is so powerful for people who want to grow. And I think podcasting is here to stay. And so you guys being committed to it and faithful to it on a regular basis is making a real difference. And we're cheering you on.
Well, thank you. And we've been blessed by your podcast, The Art of Spousing. Kalisa and I love it.
Awesome.
And then Nexus, getting to level up in our leadership. But
yeah.
I'd love to hear your answer to this question. It's been 2 years.
Yeah.
A lot has changed in the world. A lot has changed in your life. More podcasts, more opportunities. That word productivity or time management. Have any paradigms changed in those realms for you? What have you learned? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I think like everybody coming out of, the season of COVID, and it feels like everybody says that during the COVID season or the pandemic, I think a lot of things changed for people. I think for myself, even looking at what productivity means and how I am productive, how I try to use my time has changed. I think, many people found during lockdowns and so forth that, there was a blessing because you were able to be productive, but then it was hard to turn it off.
Right.
It's hard to find margin because, where you may have had meetings, had to go someplace for a meeting. Now you could have meetings all day long in your pajamas, and I found it was hard to disconnect, and so very productive. But I don't know that being productive is always a positive thing if there's not balance to it. And so I think that was one of the big things for me, was just learning how to be efficient and effective, but not driven to the point of exhaustion. And, I know for myself, coming out of that season, I found I was, like many people, more tired or fatigued because there was so much opportunity to work hard and be productive and so forth, and maybe less opportunity to kind of disconnect and find recreation. And so I think, although I still am try to be very productive, I think, I'm probably a little bit more balanced now in the way that I manage my life. Just coming out of that, I think, for all of society, just trying to recover a little bit still. And I think going into a new year, I think is exciting. I think it's different than going into 2022, where everybody's like, oh man, you're trying to come back to life. But so, yeah, I think it's changed a little bit.
That's fantastic. Last time you were with us, talked about the Eisenhower matrix of how to make decisions. Can you give us an overview of that? And then I want to ask a question about it.
Yeah. So the Eisenhower matrix, kind of made famous by Stephen Covey, the 4 quadrants. And it's a great tool for determining priorities, setting boundaries. It's basically built on the idea of 2 words, important and urgent. And so, if you have a 4 quadrant kind of box, in the top left-hand corner are things that are important and urgent. And those things are time bound. They have deadlines. They have to be done right. Right below that, in the bottom left-hand corner, would be things that are urgent but they're not important. And those would be things that are usually other people's priorities. They're not things that are they're not important to you, but they're urgent for somebody else. And then in the top right-hand corner would be the things that are important but they're not urgent. They are things that a lot of times when we're trying to be productive, actually are the things we neglect, but they're the most important things because they have long-term significance for most of those areas. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that today. And then the bottom right-hand side would be things that aren't important and aren't urgent. And a lot of those things are either recreational things or time wasters. And so I think using that Eisenhower matrix as a lens to the I think when we talked about this before, I talked about things that you must do. That's that top left-hand corner. You could do the bottom left-hand corner. You should do, which is the top right-hand corner, and then the bottom corner is the things you should not do.
That's great. I find myself in a place where often I have multiple things that are important and urgent.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to figure out what to do, how to prioritize. And I guess the answer is to just keep on applying the matrix further and further until you get something. But how do you prioritize? We could talk about work, but how do you prioritize like the holistic approach to life of there are things that are urgent and important that sometimes clash.
Yeah.
So family.
Yeah. I mean, again, Stephen Covey would talk about the tyranny of the urgency. Of the urgent, so like the urgent becomes the driving force for a lot we have to do. It's the fires we have to put out. It's the things that press on us. It's, in the podcasting world, it's the pressure of knowing I have to record and edit a podcast every week. There's a timeline, and so that those things add up pressure in our life. Those things are harder to you can't just put those aside because they have to be done.
Right.
A lot of times our job depends upon it. Our relationships depend upon it. Our income, whatever that is. And so those things you really have to figure out some systems to manage those things that are the must-dos, right? And I think sometimes, what I find with leaders is they don't have a good system to actually manage the things that they have to take care of. And so they end up kind of running around with their hair on fire, trying to do everything out instead of actually having the way to kind of go, I know what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and I'm going to do it in the right time that I've set aside and planned to do it. And because of poor planning in the other areas, a lot of times people end up spending a lot of their time on things that they could do. And, a lot of times those things are easy for us to do. It doesn't take a lot of work or a lot of energy. A lot of times the could do things, especially if we're leading other people, are in our sweet spot. And we'd rather be doing those things because they distract us from the things that we really must do.
Wow.
And then, unfortunately, it's so easy to spend a lot of time doing things that are just time wasters. It's a cliche to go home and veg out on Netflix or the binge on something on Amazon or whatever, or to maybe a younger crowd, some older crowd to just binge on playing video games all night, or all day. So those things, I think, take away from the system because we don't have a system for the things that we must do. Those other things impede our time, and it makes us feel stressed, tense, overwhelmed because we know we have all this stuff that we have to do. And again, a lot of stuff we have to do is the stuff that we don't want to do. Like it's, it's stuff that doesn't bring us joy. It's stuff that doesn't fulfill us. It's just the mess of life,
Absolutely. Some of the systems that you use, I know you're big on calendar.
Yeah.
What makes it into your calendar, and how do you decide what makes it into your calendar?
Wow, that's a good question. I think there's a couple things I would say about what goes in my calendar. Part of the question, the decision matrix for me is about vision of where I'm going and what I'm trying to become.
Wow. Okay.
And so the things that are going to take my time, first of all, have to fit within the vision of where I feel like God is leading me or the person I want to be. So that's one of the things that fit in my calendar. The other things that obviously fit in my calendar are the things that I have to do, that the meetings, the administrative stuff that I have to do for my world, what in my whole life, not just church world, but doing podcasts or setting up interviews or whatever. I have to schedule that stuff in, or it won't happen. So I use that matrix and kind of go, okay, what are the things I must do? And I kind of look at the calendar from a holistic perspective. I don't look at just like a week at a time. Usually, at the beginning of the year, we're coming to the end of the year, I'll sit down for a week or so and I'll start mapping out the entire 2023. And, the whole idea of putting the big rocks and those big priorities, vacations, conferences, stuff that I know I'm going to be doing in 2023. I'll map all that stuff out for the entire year. And then I will put in my plan for my responsibilities, whether that's meetings with the team or, whatever those things are. I'll put those in each week. And then I'll just kind of map it out. And then what I'll do is each month, I will do a review of the coming month. So in January, probably mid-January, I'll do a review for the month of February, and I'll readjust any commitments that are not still happening, or priorities have changed, or meeting structures have changed. And then weekly, I'll look at the week ahead, and I have a system that I use of just kind of reviewing the week behind and previewing the week ahead. And so, usually on Thursday afternoon, Friday's my day off, and so Thursday afternoon before I leave, I'll look back and make sure that if there's anything I need to close up before I end the work week, and anything that I need to preview for the next week to make sure that I'm ready for. And then typically what I do is on Thursday, I block out my calendar of any open space. So that's a whole nother
Fascinating.
It's a whole nother discussion on your calendar being like your bank. You don't just leave an open safe, with all your money at the bank. You keep it locked up, and you have permission to get into your account or other people get in your account.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing with your calendar. So again, I'm speaking from a situation where we're in an office setting where people have access to my calendar and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
May be different for listeners who may not be in that situation where they're just keeping, their life in the calendar or whatever. But
yeah, they can still say no to an invite.
Exactly.
Say, this is the time where I need to review and preview. I love what you said about vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about that for a second, because we are in a phase of life as young adults, and it doesn't matter if you're a college student or you're raising some kids right now, you're still a young adult, and we can get caught in the next. And we talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
As soon as you graduate high school, college, career, it keeps on going and going.
Yeah.
And then in the grind of a career or in a relationship, you name it, there's always pressure to even think a week out, a month out, even think of the next year.
Yeah.
But you make time in your calendar based on the values of the vision that you have for your life.
Yeah.
So how do we're talking about time management, and in order to manage our time, we need to know how to.
Mm-hmm.
So we need that vision. How did that happen in your life?
Yeah. I think on the last episode, I shared a little bit about my leadership journey and some lessons I learned, several years ago about being responsible for my own development.
Right.
I can't expect my boss or, whoever, my parents or whoever to develop me as an individual or as a leader. I had to take responsibility for that. And so I think that's kind of where it began to kind of go, okay, well, where do I want to be? I think one of the questions that we ask a lot is like, what do you really want?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it that you really want? If you were to project out to 3 to 5 years, what do you want to be doing? What do you want your life to look like? Who do you want to be around? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I've just kind of gotten to a discipline of living kind of with a 5-year mindset of, not that I know what 5 years is actually going to be, but preparing for what that could be. And so, one of the things about my leadership journey here at Christ Fellowship is, I've never been transitioned out of a role. Like, I've never been asked to step from one role to the other role. I've always transitioned myself out of a role.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that is, I've always kind of, for the last several years, lived with this mindset of kind of going, I don't want to think that the seat I'm sitting in right now in my leadership world or in life is what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now. So I've kind of always tried to prepare myself for what's next. And when an opportunity or a need arises, to be able to step into that and say, hey, I think I can fill that need, instead of waiting till asked or, somebody else comes along that's younger, faster, smarter than me, that moves me out of my role. Does that make sense?
Oh.
And so I think in my productivity, calendaring, time management side, one of the things I had to decide is, where do I prioritize the investment in myself to get to wherever that next step that God has for me. And I don't want to wait until I get there to try to prepare for it. I want to be preparing myself along the way. The Bible says that those who are trusted with little can be trusted with much. And so I know God has entrusted all of us with the same amount of time, 168 hours a week, right? So I want to be entrusted with the time that I have to do what I can on my part to prepare myself, Holy Spirit directing, whatever that is. And so if you go back to what you started with, the Eisenhower matrix, if you go to that top corner, the the should do things, the things that are important but they're not urgent. That's really the area usually that for me that I find is the development space.
Okay.
Because that's where all the significance actually happens in our life. The things that help us grow, the things that make us better, don't happen necessarily in the must do or the could do space. They definitely don't happen in the should not do space. Playing video games all day is not going to develop you.
Bad choice.
Now, there are a few people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars playing video games. I'm probably not going to be one of them. If you're listening, you're probably not one of them either. There's only so many influencers on TikTok, so much, so
right.
Those things aren't really going to propel you to your future. What's going to propel you to your future is doing things that are going to bring significance and growth and development in your life. And so what I had to do was I had to figure out in the mess of my calendar, the things that I must do, where do I find the times for the things I should do? Things like growing in my relationship with God, capturing my thoughts and journaling, things like exercise, reading. The reason I can read so many books is because I have a discipline that I've created time, because reading is a should do. That's why, I think I said last time that the average American reads one book a year, because it's,
wow.
But if you look at the benefits of reading, and that's another podcast, but the benefits of it are so astronomical, what it does to a person's life, just to read on a consistent basis. But it's a should do thing, and people don't do it because they don't feel like they have time to do it, and so they put it off. Just like exercising, if you don't have time to exercise, it's okay if you don't do it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. If you don't exercise for years, someday you're going to wake up and your body's going to be deteriorated. You're going to age before you're ready to age. And I'm getting older. I get this. If you don't eat well, you're going to suffer the consequence. Maybe not immediately because it's not urgent, but ultimately you're going to feel the effects of that. In the same way, if you're not spending time in that should do area and things that are going to grow you as a leader, as an individual, as a human, as a fellow, person walking the planet, loving on people, then it's not going to happen. So you got to. Right. It's not going to happen in your must-dos. So for me, I had to find some other time to do that. And the reality is, I don't have any more time than you do, Lewis, or anybody else. But I did learn some things of how to actually get more time.
That's incredible. So I know you have just as much time as the rest of us, but how have you been able to create? I mean, you're able to create time somehow. What's something that you've done to get yourself to do what you need to do?
Yeah. So on average, I would say I have anywhere from 7 to 21 hours a week more than the average Joe. And
okay, how did that happen?
Yeah, so the thing is that I'm building my life while most people are sleeping, and
wow.
Science says that you need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a day to be healthy. Less than that on a consistent basis leads like sleep deprivation and can have health issues. But what I found was for those things that were going to help me in my career, in my relationships, the things that were going to help me be a better person, had to happen in hours that other people couldn't interrupt me. And so there's several books I've read, The Miracle Morning, the 5 a.m. Club, which was a fun book. But I just decided several years ago I was going to become a member of the 5 a.m. Club.
All right, tell us about it.
Basically what that means is every day I get up at 5 a.m. And I don't just get up and just kind of meander around. I get up at 5 a.m. and I start my day. And I think, even just a little survey in this room, it looks like it's like 6:30-ish is like the average time of getting up. So if you figure, an hour and a half to 2 hours extra I'm getting each morning building into myself that other people are basically sleeping away. And,
Wow.
The thing about time is, once it's gone, it's gone. So, sleep is great, but how much sleep do you need? So if I go to bed at, 10 o'clock at night, I can get up at 5 a.m. and while other people are sleeping, I'm beginning to build into myself. So that's where I do the things that are going to propel my future. So every morning I get up, grab a cup of coffee because you need some caffeine at 5 a.m.
I can imagine.
But, I go straight to scripture and spend a little time in the Word and prayer. I journal each day. It's not a lot, but I have a five-year journal, so I can each page has a day, the same day for 5 years, and so I review what happened in the last. I'm on year 4 of that, so I review the last 3 years, and then I write just a little reflection of what happened the day before and what my plans are for the day, and then I read, and I'll read about 20 pages of 1 or 2 books, and by that time, my wife's usually up. We'll spend a little time connecting, so that's that relational time that's important. And then I get on my bike and I exercise. And so usually by a quarter till 8 o'clock, I've invested in myself spiritually, I've invested in myself mentally, and I've invested in myself physically.
Wow.
And then I've also had relational time with my wife. And so when you compound that, again, I shared this book last time, The Compound Effect, but when you compound those small choices, those 2 hours a day, that's 14 hours a week. If somebody gets up at 7 or 6:30, over the years, I'm able to actually do a lot of investment in myself that a lot of people have to find other time to do. And so it's not like I'm Superman or anything. I've just made a decision to prioritize developing myself in a way that is not going to be interrupted. The other thing I do too, and this is, I think a lot of times what happens with the tyranny of the urgent is a lot of people will get up in the morning and the first thing they'll do is they'll scroll through social or they'll check their email. And I don't check my email until I come into the office. And the reason I do that is because the reason I don't check my email is because I don't want somebody else's priorities, their things are urgent, to interrupt my priorities. And so once I open up my email and I start seeing something that somebody sent me from the night before or whatever, then already mentally I've been hijacked. And I want that time prioritized for myself. So it's not just about my calendar of guarding time, but it's also about the decision that I'm not going to allow somebody else to steal the time. So that's probably been the biggest game changer for me is, I don't read, I'll listen to audiobooks in the car, but I don't listen to books on my bike or anything. I use that for thinking time. And, basically, this year, I'll end up reading about 55 books, and the only time I really do it is between that 5 and 6 a.m. period of time, and
5 a.m. club.
Yeah, the 5 a.m. club.
Well, we need to join that.
Yeah.
We need to get some people rally behind 5 a.m. I've got this idea that I came across by Timothy Ferriss, and here's a quote. It says, "Never automate something that could be eliminated, and never delegate something that could be automated." And this is idea of automation to save time, to achieve peak time management. What are some things that you've automated in your life?
Yeah, so obviously, from where I am now in leadership, from where I started, there's things I don't have to do now that, maybe somebody who's starting out in their career, and I get that. So like even some of the response to emails and so forth, I don't necessarily have to do that. I have found some tools like I'm probably going to call it the wrong name, but it's called Sane Box. I think that's what it's called. But it filters out all junk mail.
Great.
And it not just junk mail, but it also filters out like advertisements. So it puts them in separate things. So I can go back and review them if I want to, or it just takes it out of my inbox. And so setting up using something like that tool, or just setting up some rules in your email inbox that are going to filter out junk. There's some tools like Unrule. Is that, I think, Unrule Me? That basically you can use it and it will go through your inbox and it'll basically unenroll you from, unsubscribe you from
I need that.
all sorts of stuff. So there's some of that stuff that's just like, that's automated. I think anything, as we, early on in our marriage, we couldn't do this because, we were dirt poor, but as we've been able to have a little more resource, the things that we don't have to do, we don't do. Like, I remember how big of a deal it was when we were able to hire somebody to do our yard. I like doing the yard, but and I would still do it, but just the time and energy. So I think those are kind of probably things that Tim Ferriss is saying. In the business world, there's a lot of people who are using like virtual assistants and so forth, kind of take care of a lot of the administrative stuff that would be kind of that automating or delegating types of things. But for me, the funny thing for me is the last couple of years, I've gotten less digital and more analog.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and so like even with like book reading, I've tried to go like Kindle or something, but I'm totally analog on that. I've really enjoyed the process of going back to writing. I don't like my penmanship, but just the so I think because we're so inundated by digital tools and automation and so forth, which are great, I do think there's something about analog to them kind of digging.
That's interesting. My next question was going to be, what are the tips? What are the tricks? You gave us a few apps, but maybe you're not using a ton of apps and you're all analog. Do you have anything that could help us practically manage our time?
Yeah, I think there's some a couple concepts that might be helpful. One of the things that has been proven is that when people become more successful, or they're moving up in their career, or leveling up in their success, they measure time differently, and so it's easy. And even like calendar apps and so forth, it's the default is 30 minutes or 60 minutes, an hour or 30 minutes. But highly successful people actually measure time by minutes and instead of by hours. And so one of the things that I started doing several years ago was just measuring more in minutes and compressing time. I teach this idea of compress to progress. And so like if things don't just go to the default, if you have a meeting and don't just think hey, I'm going to schedule a 30-minute meeting. Well, if you don't need 30 minutes for that meeting, why don't you just schedule it for 20 minutes or 15 minutes, or don't give it an hour if it only takes 40 minutes. The reality is, if you do a lot of meetings, you're in a lot of meetings, or you call a lot of meetings, you would probably agree that there's probably a good percentage of that meeting that is wasted time. That is it's just fluff or just talking and conversation. So, there's times for relational stuff. It's not like you have to be robotic or militant about it, but if you're working, get to the work done, and so compress to progress. And I think along with that, a great principle that I learned several years ago that I love talking about is Parkinson's law. And basically, Parkinson's law says that work expands to the time allotted to it. And so if there's any procrastinators out there, they're going to understand this. So if you have a project and you think it's going to take 3 weeks to do it, it'll take 3 weeks to do it. If the deadline is in 3 weeks, you'll most likely take all 3 weeks. But if you give yourself a week to do it, Parkinson's law says that you can get that done in a week. That work expands to the time allotted. So something that should only take a couple hours can sometimes take 2 or 3 days because we've expanded it, we've allotted our time to it. So really compressing time and kind of going, hey, I'm not gonna let this linger for a month or 5 days or whatever. I'm gonna set time on my calendar and I'm gonna nail out this project in the next 2 or 3 hours. That's just another way to gain back some time, because it's not so much that you're doing all that stuff for that, but it's on your mind, and it's an open loop in your thinking and pressure on you to complete it. So anytime you can close those loops and finish those things sooner, that's a way to to kind of steal back some of that time.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. We've talked about a lot of tips, a lot of tools. If you could give us one encouragement about why time management is so important, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I think the thing I would go back to is I have this quote that I always go to from A.W. Tozer, and he says that time is a resource that is non-renewable and non-transferable. You can't store it, slow it up, hold it up, divide it up, or give it up. You can't hoard it up or save it up for a rainy day. When it's lost, it's unrecoverable. When you kill time, remember that it has no resurrection.
Wow.
And here's the deal. I think the encouragement I would wish somebody would have said to me when I was in my, early to mid 20s, late 20s is, hey, don't waste your time. You're not getting it back. Mm-hmm. And I think, when I was younger, I didn't have the appreciation for the brevity of time. And now that I'm a little older, I have a lot more appreciation for how precious and how valuable time is. And I can't go back and get the wasted time or the time I goofed off when I should have been doing something else, or the time I could have been in my 20s investing in my future. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I wonder how much farther I would be along, or what else God could have done in my life if I would have been a wiser steward of my time in my 20s and early 30s.
Wow, that is a sobering thought, but that is a reality. That this is a non-renewable resource, and we need to steward what we've been given. You even mentioned the parable of the talents.
Yeah,
and we have time.
Yeah, we do.
So we're going to use it and make sure that we can glorify God with the time and the body and the energy and the resource that God has given us.
Yeah.
Well, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't worry. We are going to load all of this into a one-page summary. It's going to be chocked full of resource, full of tools, full of tips, so that we can manage our time. And until next time, we'll see you at the Young and Adulting podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Young and Adulting. Follow us on Instagram at cf.youngadults. And if there's a topic you'd like to talk about, we want to hear about it. Send us an email or leave a comment with your thoughts. We'll see you next time.